On Valentine's Day morning, February 14, 2026, a tragic double homicide unfolded in the Woodlake neighborhood of Vass, North Carolina, when 21-year-old Kateryna Tovmash and 28-year-old Matthew Wade were found shot to death inside a residence on Daphne Lane. Law enforcement officials say both victims were inside the home when the shooting occurred around 7:45 a.m., prompting deputies from the Moore County Sheriff's Office to respond. Authorities later identified 25-year-old Caleb Hayden Fosnaugh, an Ohio man and former romantic partner of Tovmash, as the suspect in the case. After fleeing the scene, Fosnaugh was arrested later that day in Coshocton, Ohio, during a traffic stop by the Ohio State Highway Patrol. He was subsequently charged with 2 counts of murder and breaking and entering related to the shooting. Wade, originally from Mississippi, was an active-duty U.S. Army soldier stationed at Fort Bragg, while Tovmash was described by family and friends as a Ukrainian refugee who had resettled in the United States with her family. Their deaths have been called a senseless loss of life by local officials as the investigation continues. The quiet town of Vass, North Carolina, is not the kind of place where residents expect to wake up to police sirens, crime scene tape, and news helicopters. It is a small Moore County community where most people know their neighbors, where mornings are usually marked by routine and familiarity. But on Valentine's Day morning, that sense of normalcy was shattered when 2 young lives, Kateryna Tovmash, 21, and Matthew Wade, 28, were found shot to death inside a home on Daphne Lane. What initially appeared to be a baffling act of violence soon unfolded into a case involving a former romantic relationship, a rapid multi-state manhunt, and questions that continue to haunt both families and investigators. Deputies were dispatched to the residence shortly before 8 a.m. after receiving reports of a shooting. When law enforcement entered the home, they discovered Kateryna Tovmash and Matthew Wade deceased from apparent gunshot wounds. Emergency responders pronounced both victims dead at the scene. Almost immediately, investigators began working under the assumption that this was not a random act of violence. The crime scene showed signs of a targeted attack, suggesting the shooter knew exactly who he was looking for and where to find them. As detectives pieced together the early timeline, attention quickly turned to Caleb Fosnaugh, a 25-year-old man with personal ties to one of the victims. Fosnaugh was identified as Kateryna Tovmash's former boyfriend, a detail that would soon become central to the investigation. According to law enforcement, Fosnaugh had traveled to North Carolina from out of state shortly before the shooting. Investigators believe he entered the home during the early morning hours and opened fire, killing both occupants before fleeing the scene. Kateryna Tovmash's background added another layer of tragedy to the case. Friends and family described her as a young woman who had already endured more hardship than most people her age. She had come to the United States after fleeing Ukraine, seeking safety and a chance at a stable future. Those who knew her said she was resilient, hopeful, and determined to build a new life. Her move to North Carolina was part of that fresh start, one she never got the chance to complete. Matthew Wade, the second victim, was an active-duty U.S. Army soldier. Stationed at Fort Bragg, Wade was described by colleagues and loved ones as disciplined, kind, and deeply committed to his service. He was originally from Mississippi and had family spread across multiple states. For them, the news that he had been killed far from home, in a domestic-related shooting, was both shocking and devastating. Military officials later confirmed his status and said they were cooperating fully with civilian authorities. As the investigation deepened, law enforcement focused on reconstructing the suspect's movements. Evidence suggested that Fosnaugh left North Carolina shortly after the shooting and began traveling north. Authorities issued alerts to neighboring states, sharing vehicle information and urging the public to remain vigilant. Within hours, the case expanded beyond Moore County, becoming a multi-state effort involving local sheriff's offices, state troopers, and federal partners. Fosnaugh was eventually located and arrested in Ohio during a traffic stop. According to officials, he did not resist arrest. He was taken into custody and later charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, along with additional charges related to unlawful entry. His arrest brought relief to investigators and the community, but it did not answer the most painful questions: why this happened and whether it could have been prevented. Investigators began examining Fosnaugh's relationship history with Kateryna Tovmash. While authorities have been careful not to release every detail publicly, they confirmed that the two had previously been romantically involved and that the relationship had ended. Friends of Tovmash reportedly told police that she had been trying to move forward with her life. Detectives are now working to determine whether there had been prior threats, confrontations, or warning signs leading up to the shooting. Domestic violence experts note that cases involving former partners can escalate quickly, especially when one party feels a loss of control or rejection. While investigators have not yet publicly detailed a motive, they have acknowledged that the personal connection between Fosnaugh and Tovmash is a central focus of the case. The killing of Matthew Wade, who was not part of that past relationship, underscores how such violence often extends beyond the intended target. The crime scene itself was methodically processed. Forensic teams collected ballistic evidence, documented the interior of the home, and searched for anything that could clarify the sequence of events. Autopsies were ordered for both victims to confirm cause and manner of death. Investigators are also reviewing phone records, digital communications, and travel data to establish Fosnaugh's actions in the days and hours before the shooting. For the residents of Vass, the murders sparked fear and disbelief. Neighbors described being awakened by flashing lights and the presence of law enforcement vehicles lining the street. Many said they never imagined something so violent could happen in their neighborhood. Community members organized vigils and memorials, leaving flowers and candles in honor of the victims. For them, Kateryna and Matthew were no longer just names in a news headline. They were lives lost in a place that felt safe until it wasn't. Both families have since spoken through representatives, expressing grief and demanding justice. Kateryna Tovmash's relatives described her as a daughter and sister who survived war and displacement, only to be killed in what they believed should have been the safety of her own home. Matthew Wade's family emphasized his service to the country and the deep sense of loss felt by those who loved him. As Fosnaugh awaits extradition and future court proceedings, prosecutors are preparing a case that will rely heavily on forensic evidence, witness statements, and digital records. The legal process is expected to be lengthy, with multiple hearings before the case ever reaches trial. For now, investigators say their focus remains on ensuring that every detail is documented and that the case presented in court reflects the full scope of what happened. This double homicide has reignited broader conversations about domestic violence, warning signs in past relationships, and the challenges of preventing escalation before it turns deadly. Advocates stress that while not every breakup leads to violence, patterns of control, obsession, or threats should never be ignored. Law enforcement agencies across North Carolina have reiterated the importance of reporting concerns early and seeking protective measures when necessary. The deaths of Kateryna Tovmash and Matthew Wade are now part of an official criminal case, but they are also part of a much larger human story, one of love, conflict, fear, and irreversible loss. As the investigation continues, it remains on uncovering the full truth behind what happened inside that Vass home on Valentine's Day morning, and on ensuring accountability for the lives that were taken. In the days following the arrest of Caleb Fosnaugh, investigators began shifting from the urgency of a manhunt to the slower, more meticulous work of building a case that could stand up in court. While the suspect was now in custody, the responsibility of proving exactly what happened, how it happened, and why it happened fell on detectives, prosecutors, and forensic experts working together across state lines. Authorities in North Carolina coordinated closely with counterparts in Ohio, where Fosnaugh had been taken into custody. According to law enforcement officials, the arrest itself was the result of coordinated information sharing between local deputies and state agencies, including the Ohio State Highway Patrol, which conducted the traffic stop that ended the suspect's flight. That arrest prevented what investigators feared could have become a prolonged and potentially dangerous pursuit. Once Fosnaugh was detained, attention turned back to the crime scene in Vass. The home on Daphne Lane was processed again, this time with a focus on reconstructing the precise sequence of events. Ballistics experts examined shell casings and bullet trajectories to determine where the shooter stood and in what order the shots were fired. Investigators believe the evidence supports the theory that the attack was swift and deliberate, leaving the victims little or no chance to escape. Autopsy results later confirmed that both Kateryna Tovmash and Matthew Wade died from gunshot wounds. Medical examiners documented the injuries in detail, information that will be critical for prosecutors when presenting the case to a jury. While officials have not publicly released every finding, they stated that the autopsies were consistent with the physical evidence collected inside the home. Digital evidence has also played a significant role in the investigation. Detectives analyzed cell phone data, text messages, and social media activity connected to both the victims and the suspect. These records are being used to establish timelines, confirm movements, and determine whether there were warning signs or communications leading up to the shooting. Investigators are particularly focused on Fosnaugh's actions in the days before Valentine's Day, including his travel from out of state into North Carolina. Law enforcement officials from the Moore County Sheriff's Office have stated that while much of the evidence is circumstantial, the overall picture points to a targeted act of violence rather than a spontaneous incident. The personal history between Fosnaugh and Kateryna Tovmash remains central to the case. Detectives continue to interview friends, relatives, and acquaintances in an effort to understand the dynamics of that past relationship. Friends of Tovmash have described her as someone who was trying to move on with her life. After ending the relationship, she focused on building stability, working, and forming new connections. Those close to her say she did not believe she was in immediate danger, a detail that has fueled heartbreak and anger among her loved ones. For many, the idea that she survived conflict and displacement only to be killed in her own home is almost impossible to comprehend. Matthew Wade's death has also raised difficult questions. Investigators have found no evidence that he had a personal conflict with Fosnaugh. Instead, authorities believe he was killed simply because he was present. This aspect of the case underscores a grim reality often seen in domestic violence-related crimes. When violence erupts, it frequently affects people far beyond the original relationship. Wade's family has emphasized that he was a dedicated soldier and a loving son and brother who had no role in the conflict that ultimately cost him his life. The U.S. Army confirmed Wade's status as an active duty service member stationed at Fort Bragg and stated that it is providing support to his family. Military officials have also pledged full cooperation with civilian authorities, though the case itself will be prosecuted in the civilian court system. For Wade's fellow soldiers, the loss has been deeply personal, serving as a reminder of how vulnerable service members can be even off duty. As the legal process moves forward, prosecutors are preparing for what is expected to be a complex and emotionally charged case. Fosnaugh faces multiple felony charges, including 2 counts of murder. If convicted, he could spend the rest of his life in prison. Court proceedings will likely include pre-trial hearings, motions regarding evidence, and eventually a trial where jurors will be asked to weigh the facts presented. Defense attorneys, meanwhile, are expected to scrutinize every aspect of the investigation, from the handling of evidence to the interpretation of digital data. While the charges are serious and the evidence substantial, the burden remains on the prosecution to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. This adversarial process is designed to ensure fairness, even in cases involving horrific crimes. Beyond the courtroom, the case has had a lasting impact on the community of Vass. Residents have expressed ongoing concern about safety and the warning signs of domestic violence. Local organizations have used the tragedy as an opportunity to promote awareness and resources for those who may be experiencing threats or fear from former partners. Advocates stress that early intervention and support can sometimes prevent situations from escalating to deadly outcomes. For the families of the victims, however, no legal outcome can undo what has been lost. Kateryna Tovmash's loved ones continue to mourn a young woman who had dreams of stability and peace. Matthew Wade's family grieves a son and brother who served his country and never came home. Their pain is compounded by the knowledge that this violence was not random, it was personal, and it was preventable in ways that are now painfully clear in hindsight. As the investigation continues and the case moves through the justice system, authorities have urged the public to rely only on verified information and to avoid speculation. False rumors, they warn, not only harm the families, but can also interfere with legal proceedings. For now, officials say they are confident in the strength of the case and committed to seeing it through. The double homicide in Vass stands as a stark reminder of how quickly personal conflicts can turn deadly and how far-reaching the consequences can be. 2 lives were lost, multiple families were shattered, and an entire community was left searching for answers. What remains now is the slow pursuit of justice, and the hope that telling the truth about what happened can, in some small way, honor the memory of Kateryna Tovmash and Matthew Wade. If you found this case breakdown informative and important, please like the video, share it to spread awareness, and subscribe to the channel for more fact-based, in-depth coverage of real cases that matter.